Welcome to A Date with Darkness podcast, where I will be discussing the impact of hurtful and abusive relationships and how to overcome them so that you can move through your pain and get to the kind of healthy relationships you want, need, and deserve. I'm Dr. Natalie Jones. I'm a licensed psychotherapist based in California. While I hope that you find this podcast educational and informational, please note it should not be substituted for treatment with a licensed mental health professional. Also, due to the nature of the podcast, some of the information presented on the show can be sensitive to some of my listeners, so please note that listener discretion is advised. Hello and welcome to the show. I'm so happy to be back. I have a very special guest planned for you today. But again, some general housekeeping. If you need to email me questions or comments, adatewithdarkness@gmail.com. If you're looking for support from other survivors of abusive relationships, you can join the Facebook group, A Date with Darkness. And again, the links are in the show notes for all of those things. And please remember to follow me if you are an iTunes listener, because it's not enough my understanding is it's not enough to just subscribe to the show. You actually have to follow me in order to, or follow the show in order to be updated with new podcast releases. So thank you so much for tuning in. Today's guest that I have for today is Miss Michelle Goodloe. Michelle is a self-care expert, and she's going to be joining us today to talk all about ways in which we should take care of ourselves, why self-care is important, and, how to combat the I don't have enough time for self-care, or I feel guilty for self-care thought processes. So she has some really good tips and suggestions for us today. Take a listen. Hi, Michelle. Welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me, Dr. Natalie. I'm so excited.
Yay. I'm so excited to have you here too. And I know it's going to be an awesome conversation. I love it. And we met on Instagram, and I'm definitely going to put your Instagram page in the show notes so people can see and follow you too. But for folks, my listeners that don't know who you are, tell us who you are and what you do and the passion behind your work.
Yeah. So my name is Michelle Goodloe. I host a wellness space called G Michelle. And my website is gmichelle.com. I host this space as a licensed clinical social worker, as a private practice therapist, and a person who just wants to create more space for folks to take care of themselves better.
Fair enough. And can you talk a little bit about what self-care is and what it isn't?
Yeah. My favorite definition for self-care is a big one. I find self-care to be doing what you need to do to show up as your favorite version of yourself. Different practices, different habits, different routines that help you show up as the version of yourself that's the most energized, or the version of yourself that's the most present. I like to say, fill in the blanks of what your favorite version means to you. And if you can scale that big definition down a little bit more, a self-care practice is the routine act of identifying and addressing your feelings and your needs on a regular basis. So there's the big umbrella practice of doing what you need to do to show up as your favorite version of yourself. And then to actually put that into practice is developing a routine where you're figuring out what you need to take care of yourself and then actually doing it.
And what is self-care not? What do you feel like are misconceptions that people have about what self-care is, but it really isn't?
I think this question is very, very special and important because if we go back to that definition, there's a lot of different things that could be considered self-care. It depends on the individual person and what their needs are.
Mm-hmm.
What I would say self-care is self-care is not doing the things that make you feel really guilty and icky after you do them repeatedly.
Mm.
It's important for your self-care, even though, again, everyone has individual self-care needs. You want to make sure that the practices are addressing the needs that you have and you're addressing them on a regular basis. My favorite example that people like to share is, okay, if I'm sitting on the couch watching Netflix, eating junk food, isn't that self-care? Right? My question to that is that fulfilling a particular need?
Mm.
Is it fulfilling a need? Yeah.
Yeah, well, yeah, I like that. But I have this question. Black women especially. I feel like anytime they take care of themselves, like busy working professionals, and I'm not saying this is true for all Black women, but I know that with the women that I work with, and I work with women and men, but busy, top-notch working professional women of color, men, they're going to feel guilty about self-care or doing anything for self, um, because they are very entrenched in performing or doing or tackling that next goal or taking care of somebody else. Because I work with a lot of people that come from abusive relationships too. Can you
Mhm.
speak to that? Because I heard you talk about the guilt and things like that. And so I could see someone very easily listening to this show and saying, well, I feel guilty anytime I, take
Mhm.
care of myself.
Oh, yeah. But I would love to create some space to talk about
Yeah.
us. Okay. Because that's one of the reasons I started doing this
Yes.
work. If I can give a little mini story
Yeah.
here, I started my work as a social worker working at a domestic violence agency in Northern
Mhm.
Chicago.
Mm.
And in this experience, I found it to be incredible
Mhm.
and educational in
Mhm.
a number of ways. I had the true honor of working with a number of different survivors, a lot of folks who were people of color, Black folks in particular, who were in relationships that were exhausting,
Mhm.
abusive, toxic, traumatic. And everyone's in a different stage of learning what an abusive relationship is.
Yes.
And for some of the folks who were in the stage of the relationship where it felt safe for them to exit, and for some folks to escape, I found that self care was completely missing from their healing journey. I mean, I can't tell you how many folks will go, well, Michelle, what is the self care that you talking about? It sounds good, girl, but what are you talking about?
Yeah.
Right. And that's okay. That's why we do what we do.
Yes.
But I noticed a really big connection between folks who weren't able to practice self care or didn't have accessibility to it,
Yes.
found themselves in relationships that were draining. And
Mm.
again, there's a big range, big spectrum of unhealthy and healthy relationships, right?
Mm.
A lot of these folks, whether their relationships were abusive or unhealthy or traumatic or codependent, there was this missing aspect of just being able to find space to take care of themselves
Yes.
and have a healthy relationship with themselves.
Mm. Yes.
And, and
Which is
so that
why
actually,
people don't know who they are when they leave.
that's it. That's it. And that makes perfect sense.
Mm.
That's why, we do the work that we do to create space for them to heal and self-discover.
Mhm.
And quite literally, it's why I created my first journal called Self Explore, Self Restore. I actually dedicated it to the support group that I had the honor of facilitating in terms of domestic violence survivors. Because there's, okay, you've left this relationship that's really difficult. Okay, now what? Right? What's the next step in terms of healing? And I say all of that to say self care presents the opportunity for you to have a healthy relationship with yourself, which
Mhm.
is so foreign to so many Black folks. So foreign. We are told and we are taught, and let's go there. We have a historical and generational pattern of being expected to do for others,
Mhm.
constantly. And if you take a moment for yourself, you are deemed, sometimes even demonized as selfish.
Yes.
Yeah.
I would agree. And I'm glad that you brought up the emotional burnout piece in these relationships. Can you talk a little bit about that and what that looks like? How does someone know that they are emotionally burned out?
Man, how much time do we have? No, I'm just kidding. Emotional burnout, if we can look at just the overall definition of burnout, it's a long-term experience that you have in a role where you feel exhausted, disconnected,
Mhm.
disinterested. I like to say a really big difference between burnout and other aspects of feeling that emotional depletion is it happens over a period of time.
Yes.
That's what makes burnout so unique. So if you've been in a relationship that is exhausting to that level and over a period of time, we can sometimes feel that emotional depletion because we're constantly giving and giving and giving
Yeah.
and not being replenished.
Yeah. I like to
That's how
call
I would
that,
describe
yeah, I would agree with you. I like to call that I just don't give a damn.
it. Hmm.
You know what I mean? Like, I don't care. You want to run and play in traffic? I don't care. Kind of like that
Yeah.
sort of, but you're kind of like on autopilot also. Like you don't even care. You're not emotionally in tune, but you're kind of just going through the motions and you're very robotic. So for someone who is completely depleted, what are some of their initial steps in self-care? Because it's obvious that, when you get to that point of burnout, severe burnout, that you've been neglecting that for a long, long time. And so what are some simple steps or tools that people can do to, get themselves back on track
Oh,
with
yeah.
that?
The first thing is just noticing and being aware that that's happening.
Mm,
Because Dr. Natalie, just as you described, a lot of folks actually have no idea
yeah.
that they're feeling emotionally burnt out, that they are actually in need of some individual
Mm-hmm.
care for
Mm-hmm.
themselves.
Mm-hmm.
So I think just knowing
Yes.
something's just wrong.
Yes.
It's okay if you don't have the words for it.
Mm-hmm.
Something's off, something's wrong. And then seeking some level of support, whether that be support in terms of making sure you can at least get some rest. I
Mm-hmm.
think sometimes that's the most basic of self-care needs is
Mm-hmm.
I'm just exhausted and I need space for rest. I need to replenish my energy just to move forward to the next step. So that's where I think could be the most simple place to start. The self-awareness that something is wrong and some support around getting at least some of the rest that you need to move forward.
That sounds amazing. Now, I don't know if you've ever encountered this, but when I've talked with people about self-care, a lot of times people that are just at their bottom, they feel like I'm still in survival mode and I have to be because of what I need to do to get out of this thing. So self-care is really more of a luxury that I can't afford.
Mhm,
How do you
mhm,
tackle that?
mhm. Was we have to acknowledge the importance of being in survival mode and how that can really have an impact on all levels of care and how
Mm,
you show up in your relationship with yourself and with others. You're focused on surviving, on getting not just day to day, but sometimes moment to moment.
mm.
It is so significant to recognize that process. And maybe just being able to make it from moment to moment is enough in terms of your self care.
So it's good that I like that you sort of embody taking the small steps in honoring the survival and doing
That's it.
what you need to do to get to that next phase.
Oh, yes, it's
Yeah.
important. I remember working with a client. She was a single parent of a young child.
Mm,
And this was way before the times of us just being virtual. So we were
mm,
meeting in person together.
mm-hmm,
And I remember she would come to our sessions and of course be incredibly tired. The person who was causing her harm was making life incredibly difficult for her.
Mm,
The abusive tactics were extreme in terms of, trying to interfere with her job, which is financial abuse,
mhm.
interfering with her transportation. I mean, you name it, he was doing it.
Yeah.
So she was the epitome of in survivor mode. And she had created space for us to continue our counseling sessions together once a week, which I thought was huge, huge. When she showed up to our sessions, I noticed she was physically tired. Sometimes she'd be falling asleep a little bit in session, or it was hard for her to concentrate. And
Mm,
all of that was part of her experience of just surviving. She wasn't sleeping well. And I mean, it was really difficult for her to sleep well when you're consistently on edge and you
yes.
have to be hyper alert for the
Mhm.
safety of not just yourself, but your child.
Yeah.
So I asked her one day, we like to be creative in the ways that
Of
we provide space.
course.
I had the privilege of working in an office that had a couch. And I remember asking her one time, and all of the counseling that I was providing at this time was free. There was no
Yes.
cost to any survivors at the center that I was working at. And I asked her permission. I said, we meet for about an hour every week. I wonder if you feel safe, would you like to just sleep? Would you like to just have this office? I'll close the door, we can turn off the lights, and you're welcome to just rest. I'd be happy to wake you up if
Mm,
that's something that you'd like, but would you like to just take this time to sleep? She was immediately emotional because she said, I never even thought of that as an option to do. I don't want to waste your time. I said, that's not wasting my time. That's a wonderful use of time. You
wow.
don't have to worry about anything while you're here, and we'll make sure that you're okay while you're sleeping. And she was brave enough, I like to use that word,
Yeah.
to actually take the opportunity to rest. And she actually slept. In the last couple of minutes of her waking up and us ending the session, she said, I hadn't slept like that in ages. I actually cannot remember the last time I slept safely.
Mm,
Is that not self-care?
that is self-care. That is self-care, but it also
Yeah.
sounds like that was so necessary. As you said, self-care is very necessary.
Yes.
It's very interesting. As you were talking, I was also thinking about, what you were saying, but I'm also thinking about the challenges that COVID brings with
Mhm.
self-care. What are some of the challenges that you've seen with people continuing as a routine or being able to have a routine due to COVID? Because, you know, there are a lot of people out there that listen that, due to COVID, I work from home, or now I'm at home with the kids 24/7.
Mhm.
And now it's even worse than it was prior to COVID, because now I have to stay at home and I have to be on all the time. So I really don't have any time for me, which is very similar to what you're talking about, but it's being noticed on a much grander scale.
Mhm. This has been, and it continues to be in this present day, one of the biggest challenges a lot of us have ever faced.
Mm-hmm.
To have to adapt so many different ways of living just to live, I hope that makes sense,
Yeah.
has been exhausting. I feel like that's the word of the day today. And for folks who are trying their best to just be safe, because that's the first part, right? Is
Mhm.
safety. Trying their best to be safe, cohabitating and spending a lot more time with the people that share their
Mhm.
homes, in terms of that, changing the way that you work. A lot of us are still working from home or working remotely or virtually,
Mhm.
staying on top of all of the events that are going on outside of your home,
Yes,
trying to manage all the events that are taking place in your home. I mean, the list is incredibly
it
long.
is.
We have to focus on the basics. And something I talk a lot about with my clients throughout this process is, let's just do a check-in.
Mm,
What feels like it's in your control right now?
mm.
What do you feel you have power and control of? If it's
Wow.
just choosing what you wear while you're in your Zoom calls, that's okay.
Wow. Wha-
If it's making the decision on what your family eats today, focus on that for just today. I mean, it's really scaling down and slowing down
Yeah,
and taking some control over that for your own feelings of emotional safety as we're getting through this time.
that's a good way to put it. I really like that. The other aspect of self care that I'm thinking of is self compassion. You have to, there's people that, oh, they deserve a break or they need to take care of themselves. We could tell it better than we can practice it. Can you talk a little bit about self compassion, what that is, and why we need it?
Mhm. Self compassion is one of my favorite things to talk about, especially when we talk about self care. If we even just break down that word, compassion, it's this empathy or the recognition of suffering or adversity and having the desire to do something about it, wanting to do something about it. Compassion is empathy in action.
Mm-hmm.
So when we put that self in front of it, we're talking about creating space to be understanding, patient, loving, and kind to ourselves. This should definitely be included in how you take care of yourself and what your self care looks like. One of my favorite check in questions, and for my folks who like to journal, strongly recommend journaling this.
Yes.
Tell me a little bit about how you talk to yourself.
Mm.
What kinds of internal conversations are you having with yourself? Do you notice that you're putting yourself down a lot?
Mm.
Are you really hard on yourself,
Mm-hmm.
critical of yourself?
Mm-hmm.
Do you sometimes disregard when you have a need or when your body is in pain or when your mind is tired?
Yes.
What kind of conversations are you having?
Yes.
And what would you like to change about that? Because sometimes just doing something different in our internal dialogue is self care and self compassion.
What do people normally say? What do you normally hear from people who struggle with self-care? What is some of their inner dialogue that you've noticed, or some of the common themes that you've noticed?
Oh, I don't have time to take care of myself. That's got to be number one.
Yeah.
I don't have time. And I want to come back to that one because
Yeah.
that's an important.
Okay.
I don't have time to take care of myself. Self care feels really selfish.
Mm.
I have no idea what I'm doing. And self care is not accessible to me. That's what the other folks do.
Not the others.
Mm-hmm. I would say those are my top four in terms of the things I commonly hear folks say. And if I can come back to that first piece, I don't have time for self care. I don't have time to take care of myself. I always like to pause and ask, what does that mean?
Mm.
Just tell me what that means.
Mm-hmm.
Break down that phrase. You don't have time for self care. Okay, what do you have time for? The exercise I do in my workshops is I invite folks to actually pull out their agendas and walk through their agenda. Tell me what your typical day looks like.
Yeah.
And I want you to include all the stuff. I want you to include that time when you pick up your phone and you're checking your email when you're still in bed.
Yeah.
That counts. Come on, somebody.
Yeah.
Okay. I want you to tell me about when you're on your computer and you're trying your best to just stuff down a snack, while you're still checking emails.
Mm.
I want you to tell me about when you're overextending your hours to fit in another meeting or send a few more emails or work on that project when you know your day is supposed to end at 5:30 and now you look at the clock and it's 7 o'clock. I just want you to tell me what do you not have time for? Just let's get a good idea of that. Not to be judgmental, but to have awareness.
Mm.
Then I invite folks with the schedule that you have. Is there any way you can swap out 5 minutes to take care of yourself? Not 10, not 15. Is there any way you can put 5 minutes of self care on your daily schedule?
Mhm.
I don't know. Let me know because I have a feeling you have time for a little bit. You've made time for so many other things. I wonder if we can replace and create alternatives for you to have time for yourself somewhere in your day.
That sounds really good. And it sounds like more and more people are being super or overproductive, meaning that they are investing so much more time, energy, and just emotional bandwidth in their careers. Can you talk a little bit about what that's about? Why are people so invested in careers or the next thing, the next box of success that they can check off?
Yeah. There's this really limited view of what it means to achieve,
Mm.
to be successful.
Mm-hmm.
And if I can be super frank, a lot of those motivations to overproduce, overextend, overwork have so much to do with the system that is capitalism.
Mm.
Let's just talk about it.
Yeah.
A lot of folks are constantly working, pushing themselves, interrupting boundaries, or don't have any boundaries to constantly be in motion. And I kind of like to use my body with that constantly be in motion. And God forbid you stay still intentionally, it feels wrong. I know for myself, if I can disclose, it is really hard for me to meditate. Can we talk about it, Dr. Nally? It is so challenging for me to sit with my thoughts.
Mm.
And I love the practice of meditation for so many reasons, and there's so much value in it.
Yes.
But I notice I struggle with it, the girl that talks about self care all the time, because I'm impacted by these systems just like
Yes.
everybody else.
Yes.
I feel like I constantly need to be in motion. And God forbid that I stay still. Oh my goodness, I'm
Yeah.
not being productive enough. Do I need that much rest? I should probably be doing something. I should be doing something more with my time. It's about really looking into those thoughts, and we have to be intentionally still to recognize those thoughts, to do something about it.
I agree. I agree because I do think that being still kind of shuts the mind down or allows the mind to sort of gradually slow itself down. But I'm also wondering for the overproductive person, the person that's always striving to be the better than or the best, what do you feel like is their overarching goal?
You know what? I would actually ask them that question.
Yeah.
What is your overarching goal?
Hmm.
What is your definition of enough?
Yeah. It always changes, right? The bar
Mhm,
always rises every time,
mhm,
is what I found, in that there is no like, okay, once I've reached here, then it is this. And so the
mhm,
bar keeps changing. So that's very
mhm,
interesting.
mhm. I'm currently pregnant, and
Congratulations.
thank you. My husband and I have been having really meaningful conversations about what parenthood is going to be like for
Oh,
us.
wow. Mm.
And we as a family decided, you know what? I think we're going to create a life where we don't have to work all the time.
Nice.
So we can hang out with this kid we're bringing into the world.
Yeah.
And we've been having these discussions with ourselves, with our family, and really looking into our values as a family. And one of the values has just been us discussing maternity leave and making the decision to focus on our family during that time. And I can't tell you, Dr. Natalie, how much resistance and shock we have been getting from folks that we have created an opportunity to actually spend time as a family. And I want to advocate
Wow.
for parents for a moment
Wow.
that there's a misconception that maternity leave is vacation or time for rest. And I'm like,
It is not.
nope,
It
I'm
is
going to be trying to
not.
keep my child alive.
Yeah. It's busy. It's another job. Basically,
Yes,
you're taking time
yes,
off work to go to work.
that's right. And the wonderful part is this is the work that we have chosen.
Yes.
This is the work we have chosen, and we've
Yes.
decided to dedicate time to focus just on that. And
Mm,
I've noticed I have to be my own family advocate, and also pausing on explaining to folks, because that's
absolutely.
another element of
Yeah.
self-care.
Absolutely.
But it's about, you know what, we've decided we don't want to make our lives all about work. How can
Mm,
we make sure our work fits into our life, not
mm,
the other way around?
mm. Which is the way it
This
should
is
be. Yeah.
exactly, but it's very new. And I really want to speak to the people who are listening going, Michelle, what are you talking about? Like, I've never even thought about life that way.
Yeah.
Trust me, this is new for us too.
Yeah.
We are coming from generations of incredibly hardworking people
Mm-hmm.
who have made so many sacrifices for us to get right here. And we want to honor that by saying, you know what, we want to create space for having life, and work is only a part of that life. Work is
Mm-hmm.
not our life.
Absolutely. And I totally agree with you. I'm not pregnant, but I made a move that's very similar in terms that I decided not to have a job anymore.
Mhm.
Meaning that I used to work for corrections, and I don't know how much you know about that, but that is very
Mhm.
grueling, tiresome work. I really enjoyed a lot of aspects of it, but there's a lot of red tape involved. There's just so much, again, emotional bandwidth that has to be invested in that. And I said, I can't do this anymore. I'm 42. Time is very special to me. It takes on a different meaning as you get older, and if you have milestones like pregnancy, or even if you get sick or something happens, you look up
Mhm.
and that time is gone, and you've just spent it, so much of it at this place where and letting things that you really value, such as family or traveling or whatever person's value is, you just let those fall by the wayside because you've invested so much in someone else or something else that can very well view you as being very disposable.
Mhm. Yeah.
So it's good that you're talking about um, having our values in alignment with who we are and building around that. And I think
Mhm.
that's the difference between surviving and thriving, because a survivor is going to do what they need to do to make money. They're going to do what they need to do to make it at work in their home. So they're going to be, pushing themselves to the point of no return because that's what they
Mhm.
have to do to survive. But when you can thrive, you can pivot and make these,
Mhm.
cut out these things, even if it's momentarily or whatever. So you can work
Mhm.
from home. You can say, I'm going to take a leave of absence and I'm going to do this other thing. And again, I understand you have to have some bandwidth in order to do that. You have to have some safety in order to do that. But oftentimes, as you were saying, some of the challenges or the biggest challenge can be mindset.
Mhm.
Mindset. Like, no, you have, the only way you can have safety and security is to stay at this job and to do this
Mhm.
thing that we're all programmed to do. And if you step outside of that, you've lost your mind. Michelle, you've
Mhm.
lost your mind. How dare you stay at
Mhm.
home and take maternity leave?
Mhm. But that's so true. It's so true. And I hope even just in conversations like
Yeah.
these, that somebody is hearing this and knows that, you know what, there actually are other options than just working, than just waking up and going to sleep and working day to day to day to
I don't
day.
think they do. When you're burned out, I don't know that other people can see that. And it's like this like weird thing. Even like as you were saying, and myself too. I wrestled with this for a long time. Like it was like
Mhm,
my therapist's like, it's a no-brainer. Get out of there. What are you doing? I'm like, I
mhm,
don't know. But I think that's part of the burnout is like it's almost like this emotional prison that we put ourselves in terms of that routine. This is the only way.
mhm, mhm.
This is a deep program. This is the only way you can make it and be successful, or you can get your needs met, or you can be safe or secure or whatever.
Yeah, I think we're still learning and finding opportunities to see things differently.
Mm, I think so. Yeah. And it's
Mhm.
it's interesting. I'm excited for you on your journey. But I also think that's a huge self-care step.
Huge. And I know for myself, it took a lot just to get here to say that out loud.
Tell us about that. Can you share a little bit about what it took to get to that point?
Mhm. Number one is therapy.
Right? I love that.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. The person that I am today and how I view self-care was because I actually stepped out and got the support that I needed. I share my self-care story in my book, The Self-Care Investment, how I started out in my career as a really green, wanting to be so helpful social worker.
Oh, I love that.
I mean, and I love my job. I love my profession. It is what I am supposed to be
Yeah.
doing
Yeah.
in terms of work. But I really stepped in to this work, working full time, going to work early, staying late,
Mm,
skipping lunch,
mm.
eating whatever was available quickly, sleeping just enough to get up and do it all over again. I didn't have a personal life.
Mm,
My life really was centered 100% around work.
mm,
And I had this and when you were sharing about your experiences with work, I connected with that because I
mm,
loved the work.
mhm,
It, this wasn't like something I despised. I really loved doing it, but
mm,
I had a misunderstanding around taking care of myself there. And I
mm.
have to say this is really important. I was working within an environment where everybody was doing what I was doing. The culture was everybody's supposed to be working this way.
Yes.
So it
Yeah.
wasn't just a micro level individual experience. This was a part of the culture.
Yes.
This is what I saw my leaders doing. I saw my peers doing it.
Yes.
Then I'm showing interns and volunteers how to do it. I mean, it's just different levels all
Yes.
influencing each other.
Programming.
That's it. I was a children's counselor at this time,
Mm,
and I was working with one of my child clients, and we were doing an activity together. The focus was their healing. And I remember they stopped the activity to look up at me and they said, Miss Michelle, are you all right? What? I don't know if I put my hand immediately to my chest. I
yeah.
was like, what are they asking me that for? What do they think is wrong? All of my schooling and training told me that I don't think they're supposed to be asking me that. Why are they asking me that?
Yeah.
Well, this child was seeing a person who hadn't slept properly in months, who had a perpetual cold. So I was coughing and sneezing all
Wow.
the time. I know my eyes were sunken in. I
Wow.
know I looked exhausted and sick.
Mm.
That question was incredibly important and necessary. This child was worried about me.
Oh.
And I will share this. And instead of just reflecting on that, I actually felt really guilty. Here I am. I've been given the responsibility to help this child heal. And now I'm a distraction
Mm.
to their healing process. So
Mhm.
part of my work that I had to do was do something about that guilt because it was getting in the way of me taking care of me.
Yes. Yes.
It was making me feel like, oh my gosh, I can't take care of me. I'm not doing a good job at this. Oh my gosh, am I failing at this? And you can see why I needed to get some additional support from a licensed professional
Of
to
course.
sort out these narratives that I had about being a hardworking social worker.
Mm-hmm.
And why did that have to cost me my health to do it?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
I'm glad you sought help because I do feel like that's another thing that people of color don't do is often. I also wonder about the overinvestment of time in your job. And although I know with Black women, we have the superwoman syndrome stuff that kind of goes into that. It could also be survival and, just your community pushing you. But I'm also wondering, in what your thoughts are on it being a method of avoidance.
Hmm. I couldn't agree more with that because avoidance is trying your best to not do what needs to be done. And I can't tell you how many folks who say, I don't have time for that, are feeding into that avoidance narrative
Mm.
because, gosh darn it, working on your health can be really scary.
Mm.
Sitting in front of a therapist and talking about things you've never talked about with anybody before is scary.
Mm-hmm.
There's no denying that. But something that I've been doing in trying to advocate for mental health care is by calling it just that. This is a part of your health,
It is
right?
very much so. Very
And
much
again,
so. Ugh.
historically, this has not been accessible to us, to Black people. So we are actually still in an educational phase
Mhm.
of just providing safe space for Black people to know you can take care of this part of yourself too.
Mm.
You actually do have that opportunity now.
That's amazing. Well, it's
Yeah.
amazing. And it's necessary for people to say that you don't have to be crazy. And, because that's the other piece is that when Black folks do show up to therapy, they wait until the bottom is the bottom. Like things are so bad and in such a dark place. We have tried to work on it and fix it ourselves,
Mhm,
because we don't need any help or we're
mhm,
not crazy. What do
mhm.
you say to somebody like
Oh, again, how much time do we have?
that?
No, that's near and dear to my heart. And what I would say to someone who has reached that point is, are you ready to do something different?
Yeah.
Just tell me about your readiness to do
Mhm.
something different. Because what I heard was what you're currently doing isn't working.
Yes.
So I don't know. What if we try this? We can
Absolutely.
try it. And we don't have to be married to it, but we can try something different. That's really what I focus on when I talk about this in my professional life and my personal life is
Mm.
what if we treated this part of you like we treated any other part of your health?
Mm-hmm.
What if we could normalize that component of it just a little bit? Do you know there are professionals that can help you work out your shame? Did you know? There are people specifically trained, people who look just like me and you,
Right.
who understand trauma.
Yeah.
I don't know. Let's check it out. Let's go down to the therapy for Black girls. I don't know.
I love it. And it's
Yeah.
so true. And, the first thing that comes to my mind, in addition to therapy, is boundaries, and for people that, as you said, they say they don't have time or they can't afford that. Can you talk a little bit about some of the boundaries they can implement? And even, not just with their time and things like that, but even like what you were saying, like with your tribe of folks that were telling you, no, you shouldn't do that, or they were kind of doubting you? Is there
Mhm.
boundaries that they can be putting with people, you know, that can help them make themselves sort of put themselves first?
Yeah. It, I love a good visual. So I like to say if self care is the body, boundaries are the outfit that you put on that body.
Mm, mm,
We have to have boundaries for our self care to be practiced consistently.
mm-hmm,
We just have to.
mm-hmm.
And sometimes it goes hand in hand that the self care is boundaries and boundaries are self care. That's okay. They're intertwined, they're in relationship. So, when it comes to thinking about how you want to take care of yourself, consider your boundaries your ways of protecting those practices so they don't get forgotten about or planned over or not scheduled.
Mm.
But one of my favorite boundaries that I have is around my time. Make that one of our themes today too, right? Our time is incredibly precious.
Mhm.
And again, as I'm thinking about my own personal life, I'm like, man, I got to be really intentional with my time at work because that's
Mhm.
time I'm not going to spend with my kid. Okay. I think a boundary is necessary.
Yeah.
And of course, you don't have to be a parent for that to be a focus. But if it's really important for you to get at least 6 hours of sleep every night, you know that when you show up every day and you've gotten at least 6 hours, you're able to do the things that you want to do.
Absolutely.
That means you've identified your self care need, which is 6 hours of sleep. The boundaries need to be how can you protect that time? What needs to happen so that time is protected?
Mhm.
Do you need to make sure you end work on time?
Mhm.
Do you maybe need to prep a few meals on the weekend so you have enough time to eat and do all your work
Yeah.
within your work hours? Do you need, here's the big one, do you need to learn how to include this word that starts with the N and it ends with the O into your daily chats? Do you need to focus on what's urgent and important instead of everything else? I have all kinds of wonderful resources literally broken down on my website to help
Yes.
folks figure this out
I love it.
because it's a lot.
I love that. Yeah, it is. And what about when they come back and say, but Michelle, I don't want to be selfish, or my partner is calling me selfish, or my family is saying that I'm selfish?
Mhm. Those are my people. Those are my folks. I'm going to take ownership of that.
Yeah.
My favorite affirmation to really recognize that is I am too important to not take care of myself.
Mm-hmm.
When I take care of myself, I'm able to show up to do the things I want to do, to be my favorite version of myself in my relationships. That is not selfish.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, if I don't take care of myself, I'm not able to show up
That's
to
right.
do the things that I want to do, to be the partner I want to be the
Yes.
friend that I want to be.
Yeah.
That is the affirmation I am consistently telling myself when that feeling of selfishness or that feeling of guilt tries to creep in and
Yes.
interrupt my process. That is an internal boundary that I have to maintain to protect my self care. I'm too important. And I invite folks to use that exact affirmation if you need to. Think about what would happen if you weren't here. Let's really think about it. What
That
would
would
happen
too.
if you,
Yeah.
right? If you couldn't show up at work, if you couldn't show up in your relationships, if you couldn't show up at your friendships,
Yeah.
that's what happens when we can't take care of ourselves.
Mm-hmm. The show will go on. And, I remember, it's such a funny thing in corrections because we're all moving like you were moving in your job, where we were just
Mhm.
tired, we're stretched very thin. And the notion was that if you were a good employee would show up and do their work, and then you have to do the other people's work person's work or people that are at your job that are out. And so there was like this, they wouldn't have coverage to come in, but someone else would be doing your work. And so there would be resentment
Mm.
for people that kind of continue to call out and say, oh, I'm taking care of my self-care. I'm taking care of my self-care day. So it's like if you're overperforming, other people are going to take their time and do what's necessary for them with no problem.
Mhm.
Why can't you? That's a systemic issue.
It is. It is. I when I do certain self-care workshops for groups and for staff, as part of preparing for the workshop, I ask a little bit about the work culture. Because I tell folks, if you're asking me to come speak to your group and there are no practices or potential for practices
No.
for there to be organizational self-care or
Yes.
organizational care, trust me, this workshop not gonna help. Mm-mm. It's not gonna help. It's gonna ruffle some feathers.
Yes.
Because that is something I like to address. The concept of self-care is an individual experience, but for folks to have opportunities to take care of themselves, bigger systems need to be addressed. If you're the executive director of an organization that critiques every single ask for requests for times off, and there's really limited terms on what it means to take a day off, do you think everybody's going to be excited about practicing self-care?
No.
No.
Not at all.
If you're sending emails past the time that people are supposed to be off and sending passive aggressive messages about how they should respond right away,
Yes.
do you think that's promoting a culture of self-care?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Not.
So before you go and tell your employees to take care of themselves, are you creating an environment, leaders, people with power, for people to actually do that?
I can't agree with you more. I can't agree with you more because they would do compassion fatigue seminars and stuff, and it was almost like a joke. It's like you're not even creating that environment, but you're telling us call EAP or do some, do these things if you're. So yeah, I agree with you and I appreciate you for saying that.
Oh, yes. Yes. Again, it's a bigger issue. It's a bigger issue. And I like to speak to that to make sure that, of course, you have your individual responsibility to take care of yourself, but that's very hard to do if you're working within systems and cultures that don't promote that.
Exactly. And I appreciate you saying that. So thank you so much. Well, our time is at the end. Tell folks how they can find you if they want to contact you, which I think you mentioned a little bit in the beginning, but give us the links and then I'll make sure to put those in the show notes.
Absolutely. Guys, my name is Michelle Goodloe. You can find me on Twitter, Pinterest, and Instagram at the G Michelle with 2 L's. Please feel free to sign up for my newsletter where we talk about stuff just like this all the time.
Nice.
And that's on gmichelle.com. Or if you're on social media, click the link in the bio. It'll take you right there.
I love it. And any last minute words for the listeners?
Yeah, I just want to thank your listeners for being here and sharing space with us. I hope there was at least one nugget that you can take with you to get started on your self-care journey. This is definitely something I am incredibly passionate about, and I love creating space to talk about how we can take care of ourselves better. So I hope this isn't goodbye, but see you later.
Nice.
And thank you for being here.
I love that. And thank you so much for being here and taking time out of your day.
Of course. Thank you, Dr. Natalie.
Thank you so much for tuning in. Please let me know what your thoughts are on Ms. Michelle Goodloe. And as always, I appreciate you taking the time out of your day to listen and or watch the podcast episode. Please stay tuned as you will have some snippets, a snippet, I should say, a preview of next week's podcast episode. So if you want to get a glimpse into what to listen for, stay tuned for the next couple of minutes. And until next time, be well. Thank you so much.